Chapter 28 Types of Investment Properties Introduction. Objectives. In this chapter, we will discuss the characteristics of investing in real property and different property types. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to 1. Identify and describe critical investment concepts that impact residential and commercial property investment. 2. Describe the various types of real property and their general investment characteristics. 3. Contrast the advantages and disadvantages of investing in a specific type of investment property. Key terms. There are some important terms in this chapter. Remember to pay particular attention to these terms when you see them. Anchor tenant. Leverage. Time value of money. Rate of return. The New York Bureau of Educational Standards requires that you spend 200 minutes studying the material in this chapter. Your course timer can be found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Real estate investment. While saving essentially means storing money, investing means using money to earn more money. A basic goal in investing is to generate more income and create wealth. Real estate investments are different from stock market investments because the control remains in the hands of the investor. The investor makes his or her own decisions that affect the future of the investment and can also structure purchases and sales according to his or her particular needs. An investor can realize profits from real estate in several ways. Positive cash flow, any cash received from rents that is in excess of the expenses. Tax benefits. Real estate can both avoid and shelter income from taxation. Appreciation. Property can increase in value and be realized at the time of sale or can be realized by borrowing on the equity. Property can also serve as a hedge against an inflationary economic trend. In addition, property investments are generally considered to be long-term and low-risk, as compared to some other types of investments. However, as with any investment, investors can also lose money. With property, this usually happens in one of two ways. Negative cash flow, when income does not exceed expenses, although often the tax benefits will minimize the effect. Loss realized at the time the property is sold. Characteristics of real property investments. As we said on the previous screen, the goal of investing is to realize profits. Investors accomplish this by weighing several factors. These factors include risk, liquidity, and leverage. Risk. Risk is the chance of experiencing a loss. The loss can be either monetary or non-monetary. A loss can be real even if it is only considered a loss by one individual. Often, the greater the risk of loss, the greater the potential rate of return on the investment. Sometimes after an investor examines all the factors involved, he or she will determine that the risk is not worth the return that he or she would realize. Rate of return. As we said, the purpose of investing is to generate a return or profit. Investors want both a return of their investment, the recovery of the invested monies, and a return on the funds in the form of a profit. When determining where to invest their funds, investors calculate a rate of return on the investment to see which investment will perform the best. Property investments must offer the promise of higher returns in order for an investor to choose property over other, safer investments. For example, if an investor knows that he or she can get a 6% return on a treasury bond, he or she will expect more from a property investment because of the risks involved. Time value of money. The time value of money is based on the idea that money available at the present time is worth more than the same amount in the future, due to its potential earning capacity. This core principle of finance holds that, provided money can earn interest, any amount of money is worth more the sooner it is received. For example, if $1,000 is invested today at a 5% interest rate, it will be worth $1,050 in 1 year. On the other hand, that $1,000 received 1 year from now would only be worth $952.38 today, assuming the 5% interest rate. The present value of an investment is the principal invested. In our example above, that's $1,000. The future value is the principal plus the interest minus $1,050. Once an investor has done a detailed analysis of an income-producing property, he or she must decide whether or not the investment will provide a sufficient or competitive return. The answer to that question will depend on several things. The nature of other real estate investments. What other investments may be available to the investor? The particular returns that those other options would yield. Differences in risk between the investments being considered compared to the other available alternative investments. Other types of risk. What investment characteristics are unique to real estate that would make it riskier than investing in government securities? What risk characteristics make real estate investing different from such things as stocks, corporate bonds, and municipal bonds? In addition to the financial risk associated with debt, a property investor must consider several other risk factors, including business risk. Changes in economic conditions can have an effect on some properties more than others depending on the property type, its location and any existing leases. Liquidity risk. This risk occurs when the real estate market is slow with not many buyers, sellers, or transactions. Inflation risk. Unexpected inflation can diminish an investor's rate of return if the income from the investment does not increase enough to make up for the effect of the inflation. Management risk. This risk is based on the capacity of the manager and his or her ability to innovate, respond to competitive situations, and operate the business activity competently. Interest rate risk. Changes in interest rates can affect the rate of return equity investors earn. Legislative risk. Changes in regulations such as tax laws, rent control, zoning and other government restrictions can negatively affect an investment's profitability. Environmental risk. Changes in the environment or the sudden knowledge that an existing situation could pose health hazards can have an effect on the value of real estate. Liquidity. Liquidity is a term that refers to an asset's ability to be easily converted through an act of buying or selling without causing a significant movement in the price and with minimum loss of value. Cash is the most liquid asset. A liquid asset can be sold rapidly, with minimal loss of value, anytime within market hours. The essential characteristic of a liquid market is that there are ready and willing buyers and sellers at all times. An illiquid asset is an asset which is not readily saleable due to uncertainty about its value or a lull in the market in which it is regularly traded. Property is considered an illiquid asset which cannot be transferred as easily as other assets, such as stocks or bonds. Given the illiquid characteristic of real estate, investors should carefully examine their goals before making an investment in property. Is this a short-term or long-term investment? Does the investor want to hold the property permanently or does he or she hope to sell quickly at an opportune time and move on to another investment? Real estate investments can fluctuate due to trends in the market, so investors should be certain that they have enough reserves to wait out a low period in the economy. Leverage. Leverage is the use of borrowed funds to increase the potential return of an investment. Financial leverage is created by mixing borrowed funds with equity. The higher the ratio of borrowed funds to equity, the greater the degree of leverage. Leverage magnifies both gains and losses. When the rate of return exceeds the costs of borrowing, the leverage is said to be favorable or positive. If the cost of borrowing is greater than the return, then the leverage is unfavorable or negative. Mortgage borrowing for property investments is popular because of its potentially positive impact on the investment. Favorable leverage increases the yield on equity funds. Multiplies the tax deduction for depreciation expense by allowing the purchase of a more expensive property with the equity funds available. Amplifies the benefit from favorable tax rates that apply to capital gains. Financial leverage can be measured as a debt-to-equity ratio, that is, total liabilities divided by shareholders' equity. In the real estate market, the ratio between borrowed funds and the market value of the property being financed is more commonly used. This is the loan-to-value ratio that we discussed in a previous chapter. Check your understanding. Print this screen, answer the questions and then advance to the next screen to see the answers. 1. What do we call the idea that money available at the present time is worth more than the same amount in the future, due to its potential earning capacity? 2. List 3 other risk factors an investor must consider besides financial risk. 3. What is liquidity? Point 4. How is financial leverage created? Check your understanding. Answers 1. What do we call the idea that money available at the present time is worth more than the same amount in the future, due to its potential earning capacity? Time value of money. 2. List 3 other risk factors an investor must consider besides financial risk. Business risk. Inflation risk, management risk. 3. What is liquidity? A term that refers to an asset's ability to be easily converted through an act of buying or selling without causing a significant movement in the price and with minimum loss of value. 4. How is financial leverage created? Financial leverage is created by mixing borrowed funds with equity. Property types. Investment in income-producing properties can result in several benefits to the owner. Expenses can be deducted, taxes can be sheltered, and allowances for depreciation can be taken. Investment properties can fall into any one of a number of categories. Unimproved land, office buildings, residential properties, mixed-use buildings, retail centers, manufacturing properties. Let's take a look at each of these categories. Unimproved land. Investment in unimproved or undeveloped property is probably the riskiest of all property investments. It can be the most illiquid of all property types. An improved property is a long-term investment with a negative cash flow. Even if the investor pays for the property in full, he or she must still pay the yearly taxes, which could increase substantially over time. Also, since there are no improvements on the property, there are no depreciation benefits with unimproved ground. Another disadvantage in purchasing an improved property is that the zoning of the land can change. A change in zoning could mean a change in the property's value. A change from residential to commercial could result in a substantial increase in value. Conversely, a change from commercial to residential could have serious adverse effects on the property's value. In addition, governments can impose building restrictions that could limit or even prohibit development until utilities are brought to the site, utilities that could be charged to the property owner. On the other hand, the advantage to investing in unimproved property is that it offers excellent appreciation potential with the added benefit of no management issues. If there are no tenants and no buildings, not much can go wrong. The greatest increase in the value of real estate comes from taking vacant land with the lowest basic value and turning it into a high-value property, ranging from commercial sites to parks. When circumstances are favorable and the investor knows what the future plans are for the area, land investment is not a risk for investors that have the time and the carrying ability. Office buildings. An office building can be a major multi-tenant building in the central business district of a large city. Or it can be a single-tenant building, sometimes built for a specific tenant's needs, such as a medical office building near a hospital. It can range in size from a few hundred square feet of small offices to a complex with several million square feet. Office buildings are found in any number of areas: business districts, suburban areas, small residential neighborhoods and large, specially built office parks. Modern high-rise buildings have tended to replace older, smaller buildings in central business districts, while 1- to 2-story office centers have been springing up in office parks in the suburban areas. Office buildings vary by size. Low-rise. These buildings have few stories, usually 1 to 3, and have no elevator. Mid-rise. These are moderately tall buildings, averaging 4 to 15 stories, and typically have 1 elevator. High-rise. These buildings are normally over 15 stories tall and have multiple elevators. High-rise buildings are not as tall as skyscrapers. High-rise buildings tend to have multi-tenant floors near the base of the building and single-tenant floors near the top. This helps use the building space in the most efficient manner possible. Garden office. These are 1 to 5-story buildings with extensive landscaping. Research and development. These are typically 1 or 2 stories with up to 50% office or dry laboratory space and the rest workshops, storage, and possibly light manufacturing. Flex space. These buildings are usually 1 or 2 stories that can accommodate warehouse and light industrial activities in addition to offices. Residential properties. Residential properties include single-family homes and multiple-family properties such as apartments, condominiums, and co-ops. By definition, residential properties provide dwelling places for individuals or families. Although, in fact, hotels and motels sometimes provide residences for people, they are considered to be only temporary, so they are not classified as residential property. Single-family homes are characterized as detached units found in subdivisions, neighborhoods or in cluster home developments, where the owners share outdoor and common areas. Another category of residential housing is referred to as multifamily housing. Multifamily housing is usually distinguished by its location, whether it's urban or suburban, and its size, whether it's a high-rise, a low-rise or garden apartments. There are 2 main reasons that investors purchase residential property. 1. Some investors purchase property to keep, meaning that they will buy the property and hold it for the long term. As we have said before, an investor purchases property to get income, to see the property appreciate in value, and sometimes to gain tax benefits. 2. The other reason investors purchase property is to flip it. A property purchased to flip is one that is intended to be resold as soon as possible. Investors that intend to flip properties feel that they can make a profit either with or without renovation, repairs, or improvements. While the purchase price for a home is always important, it is not as critical for homes that will be held as it is for homes that will be flipped. There are a number of investment alternatives available to an investor, depending on the amount of time he or she has to spend on the investment process, as well as the investor's individual talents and goals. Investing in a single-family home for a long time, experts in the real estate field advised investors not to invest in single-family homes because they believe that they provided a poor return on the investment. As it turns out, that's not necessarily the case. Most of the time there are a large number of single-family homes on the market from which an investor may choose. Managing a single-family home is easier than almost any other type of residential property. The single-family home normally has an active resale market, which can offer a high amount of liquidity for investors. As a matter of fact, single-family homes are the most liquid of all real estate investments and are the most easily rentable. In addition to selling a single-family home outright, an investor could choose to exchange it for like-kind property. Like-kind property refers to the nature of the property. Real property must be exchanged for other real property. It cannot be exchanged for personal property. In addition, personal residences are not eligible for exchange treatment. Under the like-kind definition, a rental home can be exchanged for another rental home, multiple units, an apartment complex, commercial property, or land. Property purchased to flip. When a home is purchased to flip, it can easily turn out to be a problem if the investor cannot find a buyer who is willing to pay more than the amount invested. For this reason, it's important for an investor to avoid the following situations. Floor plans that don't have wide appeal. Outdated architectural styles. Poor basic construction. Obvious or likely code violations. Work that appears to have been performed without the proper building permits. Properties in neighborhoods that are on the decline. It's also a good idea when investing in single-family homes to stick with a familiar area. Doing so will make the investor's management time more efficient. Advantages to investing in a single-family home. There are a number of advantages that an investor can gain by choosing to invest in a single-family dwelling. There is usually a large selection of properties available from which to choose. Management of a single residence can be easier than with other types of income properties. The investment is more liquid than other kinds of property. With a single-family residence, the tenant usually pays for all the utilities and may also take care of minor repairs. With other property types, utilities may be paid by the owner and repairs may have to be contracted to outside employees. There may be a high ratio of improvements to the overall investment. This will provide the investor with a greater write-off for depreciation, maybe as high as 70 to 80%. Since property improvements are depreciable, the investor will get a greater tax shelter. Note: investments in land are not depreciable. Many tenants rent unfurnished homes. This allows the investor to avoid the comparatively high maintenance costs of furniture that might come with an apartment rental property. Also, a tenant usually stays in a single-family home longer than he or she would stay in an apartment. More advantages to investing in a single-family home. Other advantages include: passive loss rules apply to rental homes. This means that, under certain conditions, an investor could deduct up to $25,000 of losses against his or her other taxable income, such as wages, salary, interest and dividends. Since most homes are not built with the intention of their becoming rental property, the market for single-family investment homes will not be inundated with competitive rentals. Because of this fact, the vacancy rate for single-family homes is lower than for any other type of residential investment. Single-family homes have given investors a good hedge against inflation because home prices have risen more quickly and at a greater rate in inflationary years than any other class of investment property. Recent surveys indicate that half of all baby boomers plan to buy a home for retirement, which may be a second home that will generate some income. A rented single-family home is eligible for a 1031 exchange. Under Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, a property that is held for investment purposes can be exchanged for like-kind property, as we discussed earlier. In such an exchange, the capital gains tax is deferred until the investor disposes of the property in a taxable transaction. We'll talk more about tax consequences in a later chapter. Disadvantages of investing in a single-family home. There are also some disadvantages to investing in a single-family dwelling. Cash flow. Most single-family homes generate a negative cash flow for at least the first few years because of higher prices, possibly higher interest rates on the loan, and the fact that the rent may tend to stay level for some period of time, depending on the investor's willingness or reluctance to raise rents periodically. The fact that the income from rent will usually be less than the outgo for expenses is almost a certainty in the early years, even after allowing for some shelter from income taxes. Most lenders will obligate an investor to show that he or she has the financial resources to accommodate the negative cash flow before agreeing to make the loan. Square footage. Most homes have more square feet than apartments do. Larger homes yield less rent per square foot compared to smaller homes or apartment buildings where the space is utilized more efficiently. Vacancy. When home is vacant, the investor loses all of the rent until he or she is able to get a new tenant. Therefore, since only one tenant is living in a home at any point in time, the vacancy factor will either be 0% or 100%. More disadvantages of investing in a single-family home. Other disadvantages include: management. Most single-family homes have no outside property manager. Since there is only one tenant, there will be no resident manager. Therefore, most times the investor will be managing the property personally, finding his or her own tenants and showing the property. However, some investor owners are not emotionally able to handle calls from tenants, especially when complaints come and when the investor is just sitting down to dinner with the family or the phone rings in the middle of the night because the sewer clogged or the air conditioning broke during a 95-degree heat wave. Some professional management companies might agree to take on a single-family home, but the fees could be substantial in comparison to the amount of rent coming in. Repairs. Plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and other contracted work becomes more expensive every day. A single repair bill can eat up a full month's rent or even more. If the owner cannot do minor repair work, hiring contractors is a costly endeavor. Economy of operations. If an investor decides to purchase multiple investment homes and they are all in different locations, more of his or her money and time will be spent for travel and other expenses. This would not be the case if the investor had multiple units all under one roof, such as owning an apartment building. Tax deductions. Tax benefits are not as numerous as they once were, especially since the Tax Reform Act of 1986, especially in the passive laws rules. And as we all know, our government is always looking for new ways to change the tax laws, and they do so regularly. Check your understanding. Print this screen, answer the questions and then advance to the next screen to see the answers. 1. What is probably the riskiest of all property investments? 2. Typically, how many floors will you find in low, mid and high-rise office buildings? 3. List 2 reasons investors purchase residential property. 4. List 3 advantages of investing in a single-family home. There is usually a large selection of properties available from which to choose. Management of a single residence can be easier than with other types of income properties. The investment is more liquid than other kinds of property. Vacation home investments. Vacation homes can make good single-family residence investments. Many investors purchase a vacation home for enjoyment, as well as investment. The fact that interest and property taxes are tax-deductible helps to offset the cost of the second home. If the investor lives in the vacation home for 14 days a year or less, he or she can take depreciation on it. However, if the investor lives in the home for longer than 14 days, no depreciation is allowed. Therefore, many investors use a vacation home a few weekends a year and then rent it out at all other times in order to be able to take depreciation. Vacation homes that tend to be the most desirable include homes in warmer locations like Florida, California or Arizona, homes at ski resorts, homes near bodies of water, lakes, ocean, etc. If there is a popular recreational interest nearby, most any residence could provide a good second home investment. Condominium and cooperative investments. A condominium, a unit in a planned unit development, or a cooperative could be a good vehicle for providing income to an investor. The advantage of a condominium is that it is relatively easy to rent, while providing less direct owner involvement. In a condominium complex, the grounds and exterior maintenance are handled by an association, so the investor doesn't have to provide those services. On the other hand, a disadvantage is that condominiums have generally appreciated at a much slower rate than other units. When the economy is experiencing a recession, the value of a condo tends to be less than that of a single-family home. The reason for this could be that a condominium is often not the optimum purchase for many owners. Oftentimes, a condominium is a compromise, because the cost of owning a condo is often less than that of a single-family home. Before an investor considers purchasing a condominium, it's important that he or she check the restrictive covenants carefully. Sometimes condominiums and cooperatives have rental restrictions that might clash with the investor's future plans. It's also important to find out if the condominium has any special assessments for unusual expenses. Because the condominium is governed by an association, the owner has less control over the costs. Fixer-uppers as investments. Purchasing a fixer-upper for resale could be a tricky, but profitable, proposition. If the home is unattractive or undesirable because of a defect that can be cured, it could be a good investment. Property that is in poor condition, that needs repair, cleanup work or other rejuvenation, could be on the market for a long period of time. When that happens, opportunities become available in both price and terms for this kind of property. Generally, the worse a property looks, the better the deal an investor can make. Property in poor shape can often be purchased at a good price with very attractive owner financing. Some of these properties may be in foreclosure, being sold as part of an estate, or have already been foreclosed on and are being held by a lender. According to the principle of substitution, which we talked about in an earlier chapter, a person will not pay more for a property than he or she would pay for one that is comparable in utility and desirability. If an investor can buy a property that is older or in need of repair and then make it as attractive as other properties in the neighborhood, the investor will significantly increase the value of that property. One of the advantages is that the initial cost of the property plus the cost of renovation could be far less than the value of the comparable properties, making the profit potential for the renovated property fairly substantial. Fixer-uppers as investments. In addition to repairs, an investor of a property that needs fixing should consider improving the property by adding amenities that the property did not originally have. The principle of contribution is important here. Recall that the principle of contribution means that, in order for an improvement to be economically feasible, it must increase the value of the property by more than what the improvement actually cost. In addition to repairs and improvements, investors must also consider renovation, which is the replacement of outdated amenities, particularly kitchens and baths. Money spent in renovating kitchens and bathrooms usually results in at least a 2-to-1 ratio of increased value. Above all, as with any other property, location will ultimately affect the demand for the property. Architectural style, view and landscaping are also important considerations. A fixer-upper investor must avoid purchasing a bargain just for the sake of a bargain. The most important consideration is what the demand will be when the property is ready for resale. Tax note: an investor in a fixer-upper can get an important tax benefit if he or she chooses to occupy the home for 2 years. If the investor does this, then the profit on the sale of the home is not taxed as income. This exemption of $250,000 for an individual and $500,000 for a couple is not just a one-time exemption. It can be used every 2 years. We'll talk more about tax considerations in a later unit. Investing in 2 to 4 unit properties, duplexes, triplexes and fourplexes are sought-after investment vehicles, even though in certain areas they may be hard to find. These units are relatively easy for investors who are new or inexperienced. These small properties are very popular among investors and usually have good resale value. There are many laws that protect those who invest in 1 to 4 family buildings that don't apply to buildings that are larger. These laws include prepayment privileges and penalties, provision for late charges and other consumer protection laws. One of the reasons that these types of properties are so popular is that an investor can choose to live in one of the units, while renting out the remaining units. This helps the investor with the purchase of the property. While the initial rents may not be enough to make the mortgage payment, the additional cash needed for the payment will often be less than what the investor would pay for a comparable single-family home. Although the investor cannot take depreciation on the apartment that he or she lives in, the investor can depreciate the other units in the building. This will help in securing a net positive cash flow for the investor. Advantages of investing in 2 to 4 unit properties. There are a number of advantages that an investor can gain by choosing to invest in 2 to 4 unit dwellings. Properties of this size can be found in most communities. The owner-investor doesn't need a resident manager to manage the property. He or she can do it himself or herself. If the investor chooses, he or she may delegate some of the management duties such as gardening and maintaining the laundry room facilities to one of the tenants for a nominal fee. This person could also show the property to prospective tenants. Tenants often pay all of their own utilities and do repairs. Most of the units can be rented without furniture, although many of the units have appliances, carpet and window treatments. Dwellings of this size are very popular among tenants, where larger apartment complexes may not be. These small properties offer more privacy, since there are fewer families living above or below the tenant than would be the case in a larger apartment building. Smaller units can obtain good loan-to-value ratios from conventional lenders, which gives the investor greater leverage and requires less cash. Often there is a high ratio of improvements to overall investments, which offers good depreciation basis and tax shelter. Disadvantages of investing in 2 to 4 unit properties. There are also some disadvantages to investing in a 2 to 4 unit dwelling. Fewer of these types of buildings are being newly built, so they are becoming harder to find. Due to the growing scarcity, it is becoming more expensive to purchase units that already exist. Investors with little experience are bidding prices up, so the yield to the investor will not always be enough to meet the operating costs and pay the mortgage loan. This situation would require more of the owner's own cash flow to meet expenses. Since most properties of this size include appliances, carpet and window treatments, many investors fail to realize at the outset that they will need extra money to repair or replace those items. If an investor does not have reserves put aside to handle these expenses, it could be very costly in terms of the cash outlay at the times when those high-ticket items need to be replaced. Disadvantages of investing in 2 to 4 unit properties. Other disadvantages include: with properties of this size, the investor usually pays the water, outside lights and laundry room utility costs, which creates more expense than would be found in a single-family home where the tenant pays for everything. Repair costs in these size units are generally higher than for a single-family home. Owners of these units could face high vacancy rates or problems collecting the rent from some tenants. When this happens, an owner may be forced to lower the rent in order to compete with other units that are on the market. However, when this happens, an owner must be able to withstand the temporary financial losses he or she might incur due to excessive vacancies. At times when money is tight and construction costs are increasing, the construction of new apartment buildings falls off dramatically and sometimes may even come to a standstill. When new construction stops, the demand for apartment units increases and the vacancy rate declines. This stabilizes the rental market, and investors can raise their rents, allowing investors to move from the position of a negative cash flow to either break-even or even a positive cash flow. When yields from apartment buildings rise, most investors would not be interested in selling unless they could get a premium price for the property. That tightens the market, causing interested investors to bid against one another for desirable apartment buildings in key locations. If the bidding becomes intense, investors could end up paying a higher price for a property than the net operating income can support. This might lead to rent increases on the property. And then a cycle begins, with periods of high vacancy and therefore lower rents, followed by periods of low vacancy with higher rents. In order to deal with the ebb and flow of these potential cycles, an investor must have enough capital to keep the property going during the high vacancy, low rent times, at least until the investor can increase the rents to reflect the fair market value of the property. In addition, these days, changes in environmental factors make apartment buildings more expensive to build. Those buildings that are being built are governed by new energy requirements coupled with reduced land density in many cities and counties. Advantages of investing in an apartment building. The advantages of investing in an apartment building include the following. An apartment investment is generally safer than other real estate investments because housing is always in constant demand. The management is clustered in one location and not spread over a wide area as it would be if an investor owned a number of smaller units. Even a newer, more inexperienced investor can learn how to manage an apartment complex. The investor can hire a resident manager to handle the tasks of showing units, maintaining the property and collecting rents. Then the owner-investor can focus his or her efforts on supervising the property and setting up the management policies. The cost of operation per unit is usually less than if an investor has properties spread across a wider area. For example, the cost of a new roof on a single-family rental home might be as high as $5,000. Since this is a single-family unit, the cost per unit is $5,000. On the other hand, The cost of re-roofing a 4-story apartment house that has 16 units might be $24,000, but the cost per unit is only $1,500, because the one roof covers 4 stories. More advantages of investing in an apartment building. Other advantages include the following. As with the smaller apartment buildings, construction costs have increased. Land for development is more limited because of governmental and environmental controls. Because of this, fewer of the larger apartment buildings have been built. That makes existing buildings more valuable. Owner-investors can increase their rents to make up for the rising costs of operations and can therefore maintain a fair yield on their investments. Large apartment buildings provide an outstanding tax shelter because typically 80% of the value is in improvements that the investor can depreciate. Currently, personal property found in apartment buildings, such as the carpeting, appliances, window treatments and furniture, can be written off on a 200% declining balance, ranging from 5 to 7 years. A residential building can be depreciated over 27.5 years using the straight-line method. However, keep in mind that these advantages can change as the tax laws change. Larger apartment buildings tend to appreciate during times of continuing inflation and declining new apartment construction. This appreciation builds equity in the property, while at the same time equity is being built through the decrease of the loan balance. This protects the investment against inflation and can give the investor a good income over a number of years. Disadvantages of investing in an apartment building. As with all income-producing properties, apartment building investment also has its disadvantages. It is difficult for an inexperienced investor to comprehend the true expense involved in owning an apartment building. He or she usually does not understand the level of maintenance costs and fails to set aside reserves for repairs and replacements. This scenario will usually result in a negative cash flow. Unless the investor can add his or her own capital to meet these types of expenses, he or she may end up having to sell the building at a lower price before realizing any profit at all. Changes in the local environment could cause the value of the building to decrease. For example, if the neighborhood were to deteriorate into a high-crime area during the investor's holding period, the apartment building would sell for less than it would have a number of years earlier, because no one wants to rent those apartments. Rent decreases, high vacancy rates, bad debts or difficult financing can make the future sale of an apartment building nearly impossible. Changes in consumer laws pertaining to owner-tenant relations can cause problems. The changes could lead to rent collection problems and possibly mounting legal fees. For example, if an investor needs to evict a tenant for not paying rent, the cost to the investor can be very high when you consider attorney fees, legal papers and eviction costs. These costs are over and above any lost rent or any costs the owner incurs if he or she has to repair an apartment that was damaged by a tenant. More disadvantages of investing in an apartment building. Other disadvantages include the following. If the supply of housing decreases dramatically in an area, the local government could pass rent control laws that would limit the amount the owner-investor could raise the rent. When this happens, the yield from an apartment may decrease, since the rent increases that the government does allow might not cover the investor's increased operating costs. Buildings that are rent-controlled are also difficult to sell. As we mentioned earlier, some owner-investors do not have the emotional capacity to handle the problems that come with managing a large apartment complex, including the number of requests that tenants make for services. An investor who chooses to purchase a large apartment building must be a patient individual who can tolerate the intrusions on his or her personal time while dealing with the tenants in the most diplomatic way possible. Since most tenants are on short-term leases and do not have the pride of ownership that they would have if they owned their own home, they tend to take less care of the property than they would a single-family residence. So, an investor typically has to contend with more damage in an apartment building than he or she would see in a single-family residence or a smaller building. Check your understanding. Print this screen Answer the questions and then advance to the next screen to see the answers. 1. If a buyer wanted to purchase a vacation home as an investment, what would be considered an important criterion in choosing the home? 2. List 2 advantages of purchasing a condominium as an investment. 3. What is the most important consideration when deciding to purchase a fixer-upper as an investment? 4. List 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages of investing in a 2 to 4 unit dwelling. Check your understanding. Answers 1. If a buyer wanted to purchase a vacation home as an investment, what would be considered an important criterion in choosing the home? It should be close to a popular recreational interest, such as a ski resort or a lake, or be in a year-round warm, sunny location. 2. List 2 advantages of purchasing a condominium as an investment. Ease of rental services provided by the association do not have to be provided by the owner in a condominium complex. The grounds and exterior maintenance are handled by an association, so the investor doesn't have to provide those services. 3. What is the most important consideration when deciding to purchase a fixer-upper as an investment? What the demand for the property will be when it's ready for resale. 4. List 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages of investing in a 2 to 4 unit dwelling. Advantages: properties of this size can be found in most communities. Tenants often pay all of their own utilities and do repairs. Disadvantages: fewer of these types of buildings are being newly built, so they are becoming harder to find. Due to the growing scarcity, it is becoming more expensive to purchase units that already exist. Mixed-use buildings. Mixed-use development is the practice of allowing more than one type of use in a building or set of buildings. In planning zone terms, this can mean some combination of residential, commercial, industrial, office, institutional, or other land uses. Mixed-use buildings combine several unrelated or loosely related building uses into one building. For example, consider a building that contains retail and restaurant space at the ground floor, office space above, and residential units above that. By not being devoted to a single use, these buildings bring more varied and interesting life. They also create the opportunity for people to live close to their place of work. Over time, zoning laws have been revised to allow for mixed-use buildings. A mixed-use district will most commonly be the downtown of a local community, ideally associated with public transportation. Mixed-use guidelines often result in residential buildings with street-front commercial space. Retailers have the assurance that they will always have customers living right above and around them, while residents have the benefit of being able to walk a short distance to get groceries and household items or see a movie. From an investor standpoint, a mixed-use environment generates benefits that translate into higher rents and better leasing. Retail centers. Retail centers are of differing sizes and fall into categories with distinct functions. Each center usually has a main tenant called an anchor tenant. It is often essential to have a lease commitment from an anchor tenant before a lender will agree to the financing for the shopping center. Strip centers. Also called convenience centers, strip centers provide for the sale of personal services and convenience goods. These centers typically have a total leasable area of up to 30,000 square feet and are usually anchored by a convenience store, such as a minimarket. Tenants in a strip center can include a dentist office, beauty salon, dry cleaner, or small restaurant. Neighborhood centers. These centers provide for the day-to-day living needs of the immediate neighborhood. They are usually anchored by a supermarket and have a total leasable space of about 60,000 square feet, although they could have up to 100,000 square feet of space. Tenants in the neighborhood center are similar to the strip center and could include a drugstore, laundry, barbershop, shoe repair shop, shipping store, and small restaurants. Malls. By definition, a shopping mall is a public area with a complex of shops with associated walkways and parking areas. Many shopping malls are enclosed or covered to allow for the same climatic conditions year-round. Retail centers. Regional centers. These centers provide general merchandise, clothing, furniture, and home furnishings as well as other services and recreational facilities. They are anchored by one or two full-line department stores of at least 50,000 square feet each and have a total leasable space of about 500,000 square feet. These centers provide services that are typical of a business district. Mega malls, also called super-regional centers, these malls offer extensive variety in general merchandise, clothing, furniture, and home furnishings as well as a variety of other services and recreational facilities. They are usually anchored by 3 or more full-line department stores of at least 75,000 square feet each. One of these centers usually has about 1 million square feet of leasable space, but can have up to 1.5 million square feet. Outlet centers. An outlet center is a type of specialty center in that it does not fit into any of the categories described above. It has its own focus, which is typically to sell the merchandise of particular manufacturers at a discount. An outlet center is usually anchored by at least 2 large discount stores and has a total leasable space of 100,000 to 300,000 square feet. Manufacturing properties. All types of industrial properties have common characteristics in spite of differences in functions and use. Industrial property is typically divided into 3 primary categories: warehouse distribution, manufacturing, flex. These categories are further subdivided into subcategories that have their own particular characteristics to accommodate specialized functions. Industrial properties may be located in industrial areas or planned business parks, or they may be standalone buildings. Warehouse distribution. These buildings focus on storage and distribution of goods. They vary in size according to the type of goods being stored, but in general they are large, flat sites with space for maneuvering trucks and access to transportation facilities. They typically have a small amount of office space to accommodate the purchasing, accounting, and marketing personnel. The buildings usually have an attractive front with lots of windows for the office staff and good truck access to the back or side of the building where the docks and drive-in doors are located. Manufacturing properties. Manufacturing buildings are large facilities designed to accommodate the equipment for various manufacturing processes. Light manufacturing buildings can be up to 300,000 square feet, while heavy manufacturing can utilize up to 1 million square feet or more. Commercial and industrial ownership offers the advantage of greater stability of tenants as well as potentially low vacancy rates when compared with residential income properties. Most commercial leases contain either a cost of living increase or a percentage lease. This allows an owner to take in increased rents as operating costs mount. If the property is in a prime location, the success of the business results in a high percentage of the gross and therefore increased rents to the owner-investor. When a city is growing, the demand for commercial properties grows, which gives an owner-investor increased rents. Unlike apartment properties, there is very little risk of any kind of rent control. Business tenants are generally easier to deal with than apartment house tenants. Lease insurance is available, which protects both the owner and the tenants if business is interrupted because of such things as fire, storm, earthquake, or other hazards. Disadvantages of commercial or industrial investment. Commercial property investment also has several disadvantages. During times when many buildings are being built, the market can become flooded with unused commercial space. This would result in lower rents and poor investment returns. Investing in older buildings can be risky, because tenants may tend to move to newer facilities, creating vacancies which could take a long time to fill. Changes in neighborhood patterns could result in a commercial building becoming less desirable, remaining vacant, and possibly becoming subject to vandalism. If a commercial enterprise has a long-term lease with fixed rental rates, the new owners are forced into receiving a fixed income during a time when taxes and other expenses continue to rise. Local governments often require owners to add expensive safety improvements to buildings. This can result in a substantial amount of capital outlay for the investor. Fee simple versus leasehold. A commercial property can be owned outright by the business or an individual. Commercial property can also have a long-term lease on the land. Land that is leased and not owned is an investment tool used by investors to maximize their investment return by reducing the investment capital they need to obtain a property. Often sellers keep the land and sell the building subject to a land lease. This arrangement can be very appealing to the seller to avoid having to pay a large capital gains tax on the land in the event that it has increased in value over the years the seller has owned it. Check your understanding. Print this screen, answer the questions and then advance to the next screen to see the answers. 1. What is mixed-use development? 2. What is a main tenant in a shopping center called? 3. What is the difference between a warehouse property and a manufacturing property? 4. Name 2 advantages of investing in commercial property. Check your understanding. Answers 1. What is mixed-use development? The practice of allowing more than one type of use in a building or set of buildings. 2. What is a main tenant in a shopping center called? Anchor tenant. 3. What is the difference between a warehouse property and a manufacturing property? A warehouse property focuses on storage and distribution of goods. Manufacturing buildings are large facilities designed to accommodate the equipment for various manufacturing processes. 4. Name 2 advantages of investing in commercial property. Unlike apartment properties, there is very little risk of any kind of rent control. Business tenants are generally easier to deal with than apartment house tenants. Summary review. This concludes Chapter 28. Below is a summary which you can review before taking your quiz. Risk is the chance of experiencing a loss. Often, the greater the risk of loss, the greater the potential rate of return on the investment. The time value of money is based on the idea that money available at the present time is worth more than the same amount in the future, due to its potential earning capacity. Liquidity is a term that refers to an asset's ability to be easily converted through an act of buying or selling without causing a significant movement in the price and with minimum loss of value. Property is considered an illiquid asset which cannot be transferred as easily as other assets, such as stocks or bonds. Leverage is the use of borrowed funds to increase the potential return of an investment. Financial leverage is created by mixing borrowed funds with equity. Financial leverage can be measured as a debt-to-equity ratio, that is, total liabilities divided by shareholders' equity. Investment properties can fall into any one of a number of categories. Unimproved land, office buildings, residential properties, mixed-use buildings, retail centers. Manufacturing properties summary review. Summary investment in unimproved or undeveloped property is probably the riskiest of all property investments. It can be the most illiquid of all property types. An office building can be a major multi-tenant building, or it can be a single-tenant building, sometimes built for a specific tenant's needs. Office buildings vary by size. Low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise, garden office. Research and development. Flex space. Residential properties include single-family homes and multiple-family properties such as apartments, condominiums and co-ops. There are 2 main reasons that investors purchase residential property: to keep, to flip. Vacation homes can make good single-family residence investments. A condominium, a unit in a planned unit development, or a cooperative could be a good vehicle for providing income to an investor because it is relatively easy to rent, while providing less direct owner involvement. Purchasing a fixer-upper for resale could be a tricky, but profitable, proposition. The most important consideration is what the demand will be when the property is ready for resale. 2 to 4 unit dwellings are sought-after investment vehicles because an investor can choose to live in one of the units, while renting out the remaining units. Summary review. Summary: mixed-use development is the practice of allowing more than one type of use in a building or set of buildings. From an investor's standpoint, a mixed-use environment generates benefits that translate into higher rents and better leasing. Retail centers are of differing sizes and fall into categories with distinct functions. Each center usually has a main tenant called an anchor tenant. Retail centers include strip centers, neighborhood centers, malls, regional centers, mega malls, outlet centers. Industrial property is typically divided into three primary categories: warehouse distribution, manufacturing, flex. Warehouse buildings focus on storage and distribution of goods. They vary in size according to the type of goods being stored, but in general they are large, flat sites with space for maneuvering trucks and access to transportation facilities. Manufacturing buildings are large facilities designed to accommodate the equipment for various manufacturing processes. Flex space is typically defined as anything between offices and warehouses, usually combining the uses of both. A loft building is a building of several floors with large areas of unobstructed space, originally rented out for light industrial purposes and now frequently converted to residential occupancy. Click here if you would like to open this summary as a PDF, which you can then print or save to your device. Chapter 28 Summary Chapter Conclusion. In this chapter, we have discussed definition of risk, what liquidity means, how investors use leverage, different types of investment properties, advantages and disadvantages of different investments. In the next chapter we'll discuss operating statements and other computations used to analyze property. Now get ready for your chapter quiz. Good luck! 1 of 18 real estate is typically illiquid. 2 of 18 which of the following best defines risk? The chance of experiencing a loss. 3 of 18 property is considered an asset if it cannot be transferred as easily as other assets, such as stocks or bonds. Illiquid. 4 of 18 the primary advantages for investing in single-family homes are: they are the most liquid real estate asset and easiest to rent. 5 of 18 which of the following is not a disadvantage of investing in a single-family home? Scarcity. 6 of 18 all of these are disadvantages of investing in a single-family home, except for many tenants rent unfurnished homes. 7 of 18 what is the main reason 2 to 4 unit properties are popular as an investment? The investor can live in one unit while renting out the remaining units. 8 of 18 what is the concept of using other people's money for investing? Leverage. 9 of 18 which of these is an advantage of investing in a single-family home? The market for single-family investment homes will not be inundated with competitive rentals. 10 of 18 which type of property is the riskiest investment? An improved land. 11 of 18 which of the following is not a type of industrial property? Corporate headquarters. 12 of 18 which office building would have 1 to 5 stories with landscaping? Garden. 13 of 18 what risk occurs when the real estate market is slow with not many buyers, sellers, or transactions? Liquidity risk. 14 of 18 what covenant might a condominium have that would interfere with an investor's plans for the condo? Requirement to live in the condo for 1 year before leasing it. 15 of 18 which of the following is not a way investors can realize profits in real estate? Inflation. 16 of 18 which occurrence is advantageous to investing in undeveloped land? Appreciation potential. 17 of 18 which of the following statements is true? Larger single-family homes yield less rent per square foot compared to smaller homes. 18 of 18 what are the primary disadvantages of investing in a condominium? Lower appreciation rates and lack of control over costs.